Before Rome became an empire, before Athens became a symbol of philosophy, before the great kings of Persia marched across the ancient world, there was a city rising from the dust between two rivers. Its name was Babylon. To many people today, Babylon sounds like a legend, a city of towers, a city of wealth, a city of ancient secrets. But Babylon was not just a myth. It was one of the most important cities in human history. And at the center of its rise stood one king whose name still echoes almost 4,000 years later. Hammurabi. He was not the first king in Mesopotamia. He was not the only powerful ruler of the ancient world. But he did something that made Babylon unforgettable. He turned a city into a kingdom. He turned conquest into administration. And he turned law into a symbol of civilization. This is the story of the old Babylonian kingdom, from about 1894 BC to 1595 BC. Babylon grew from a regional city into one of the great powers of the ancient Near East. Its greatest ruler, Hammurabi, ruled from about 1792 BC to 1750 BC, and under him, Babylon became more than a city. It became a center of law, trade, government, and power. But the surprising truth is this: Babylon did not become great only because it conquered enemies. It became great because it learned how to organize people after victory. That is what made Babylon different, and that is why Hammurabi still matters today. To understand Babylon, we first need to understand the land that created it. Mesopotamia means the land between rivers. Those rivers were the Tigris and the Euphrates. They gave life to fields, cities, temples, markets, and kingdoms. But they also created danger. Floods could destroy crops. Drought could bring hunger. Cities competed for water, land, trade routes, and power. This was not a quiet world. It was a world of rival city kingdoms. Ur, Larsa, Isin, Ishnunna, Mari, Assur, and Babylon. Each city had walls. Each city had gods. Each city had kings. Each city wanted security. And in this world, a city could rise quickly, but it could also disappear quickly. Babylon's strength came from more than soldiers. It came from systems. Canals had to be maintained. Fields had to be measured. Taxes had to be collected. Merchants had to be protected. Contracts had to be recorded. Disputes had to be settled. This was one of the birthplaces of organized urban life. People were no longer living only in small villages. They were living in cities with professions, property, debts, wages, and royal officials. That meant civilization needed something powerful: rules. Without rules, trade would collapse. Without records, property would be disputed. Without courts, the strong could crush the weak. This is where Babylon became important, because Babylon did not only ask, "How do we win?" It asked, "How do we govern?" When Hammurabi became king around 1792 BC, Babylon was not yet the greatest power in Mesopotamia. It was surrounded by stronger rivals. To the south, Larsa was powerful. To the east, Eshnunna controlled important territories. Babylon was in a dangerous position. If Hammurabi moved too early, he could be destroyed. So he did what many great rulers do. He waited. He strengthened his city. He built alliances. He improved defenses. He watched his enemies. For years, he looked patient, careful, practical. But that patience was part of his power. The ancient world rewarded timing, and Hammurabi understood timing. When rival powers weakened, Hammurabi moved. He defeated Larsa. He took control of key southern lands. He became the strongest ruler in much of Mesopotamia. But conquest was only the first step. Many kings can win battles. Far fewer can hold what they win. That was Hammurabi's real challenge. He had to rule cities with different traditions, different elites, different temples, different local interests, and different memories of independence. If he only ruled by fear, rebellion would follow. If he ruled too softly, powerful local leaders would ignore him. So Hammurabi built a kingdom around authority, administration, and law. He had to rule cities with different traditions. So Hammurabi built a kingdom around authority, administration, and law. In Babylon, writing was power. The writing system, called cuneiform, used wedge-shaped marks. These tablets recorded business deals, taxes, and royal orders. They show that Babylonian civilization was about daily order, a farmer renting land, a merchant lending silver, a worker being paid. This was a world where written records mattered. Babylon was not primitive. It was highly organized, depending on memory and contracts. Babylon was also a commercial civilization. Trade connected cities. Silver was used as a standard of value. It was a center of movement. But trade creates conflict. What happens if a borrower does not repay? A great trading society needs more than money. It needs trust, and trust needs law. This brings us to the most famous symbol of Hammurabi's reign, the Code of Hammurabi. It was carved onto a tall black stone monument. At the top, Hammurabi is shown receiving authority from the sun god Shamash, the god of justice. Below that are hundreds of laws. These laws dealt with property, marriage, and debt. But the code was more than a list of punishments. It was a political message. The king was not just a warrior, he was a guardian of justice, bringing order to society and protecting the weak. At least, that was the ideal. A kingdom should not depend only on revenge. There should be recognized rules, judges, and procedures. This was extremely important. One of the most powerful ideas behind the code was this: a kingdom should not depend only on personal revenge or local power. There should be recognized rules. There should be judges. There should be procedures. There should be consequences. For the ancient world, this was extremely important. It did not mean everyone was equal. Babylonian society was clearly divided by class and status. A noble, a commoner, and an enslaved person were not treated the same under the law. Some punishments were harsh by modern standards. Some rules reflected a world very different from ours. So we should not pretend Hammurabi's code was modern human rights law. It was not. But we should also not miss its historical importance. It shows a civilization trying to create public order through written law. It shows a king presenting justice as the foundation of rule. It shows that government was becoming more complex, more formal, and more connected to law. Imagine living in Babylon almost 4,000 years ago. You are a merchant. You lend silver to another man. Months pass. He refuses to pay. In a world without written law, you might need family power, violence, or personal revenge. But in Babylon, your agreement may be written on a clay tablet. Witnesses may have seen it. A judge may hear the case. The law may recognize your claim. That does not mean the system was always fair, but it means society had moved into a new stage. Disputes were not only personal, they were legal. Power was not only physical, it was administrative. Memory was not only human, it was written into clay. This is why Babylon became one of the great symbols of civilization. It represented the city as a machine of order. Walls for defense, temples for religion, markets for trade, canals for farming, palaces for government, courts for disputes, scribes for records, soldiers for power, and law for legitimacy. Many ancient kingdoms were built on conquest. Babylon was built on conquest too. But under Hammurabi, Babylon tried to show that conquest needed structure. A ruler could not simply take land. He had to rule it. He had to manage it. He had to convince people that his rule created order. That was Hammurabi's genius. But every great civilization has a shadow. Babylon's power under Hammurabi was impressive, but it was also deeply dependent on one extraordinary ruler. When a kingdom expands quickly under a strong king, the question is always the same. What happens after he dies? After Hammurabi's death around 1750 BC, Babylon remained important, but it became harder to hold the empire together. Enemies returned, local powers resisted, new groups moved into the region. The kingdom slowly weakened. Babylon's first great age did not last forever. Around 1595 BC, the old Babylonian kingdom came to an end after a major attack by the Hittites. Babylon was not destroyed as a historical idea. Far from it. The city would rise again in later centuries. But the first great Babylonian age, the age of Hammurabi, had ended. And yet Hammurabi's fame survived. Why? Not because his empire lasted forever. It did not. Not because Babylon never fell. It did. Not because his laws were perfect. They were not. Hammurabi is remembered because his kingdom left behind one of the clearest ancient statements of what civilization was trying to become. A society ruled not only by force, but by order. A king known not only for war, but for law. A city remembered not only for wealth, but for administration. In that sense, Babylon's true power was not only in its armies, it was in its ability to organize life. Today, the Code of Hammurabi is one of the most famous legal monuments in the world. People still study it because it shows how ancient societies thought about justice, authority, punishment, responsibility, family, labor, and property. It reminds us that law did not appear suddenly in the modern world. Long before modern courts, constitutions, and parliaments, ancient civilizations were already struggling with the same basic problem. How can human beings live together in large societies without falling into chaos? Babylon's answer was not our answer, but it was one of the great early answers. And that is why the old Babylonian kingdom deserves a place among history's most powerful civilizations of its time. When we think of power, we often imagine armies marching, walls falling, and kings standing over defeated enemies. Babylon had that kind of power. Hammurabi defeated rivals and made Babylon the center of a great kingdom. But Babylon also shows us another kind of power, the power to record, the power to regulate, the power to tax, the power to judge, the power to turn a city into an organized society, the power to make people believe that order itself came from the throne. That may not look as dramatic as a battlefield, but in the long story of civilization, it may be even more important. Every time we sign a contract, we are living in a world shaped by ancient scribes. Every time a court hears a dispute, we are seeing an echo of civilizations that tried to replace personal revenge with public judgment. Every time a government writes laws for a society too large for everyone to know each other, we are seeing a problem Babylon understood thousands of years ago. How do you create order among strangers? How do you make trade possible? How do you make power seem legitimate? How do you keep a kingdom from becoming only violence? Hammurabi's Babylon did not solve these questions perfectly, but it asked them with historic force. So the story of Babylon is not just the story of an ancient city. It is the story of one of humanity's first great experiments in organized civilization. A city surrounded by rivals, a king who waited for the right moment, a kingdom built through conquest, a society held together by scribes, courts, trade, canals, and law, and a stone monument that still speaks across almost 4,000 years. Hammurabi wanted his name to be remembered as a king of justice. In one sense, he succeeded. Because long after his empire fell, long after his enemies disappeared, long after Babylon's first golden age ended, his law code remained. And through it, Babylon continued to speak. Before Rome wrote its laws, before Greece shaped philosophy, before later empires ruled continents, Babylon showed the ancient world a powerful idea. A kingdom is not only built by the sword, it is held together by law. That was Hammurabi's legacy. And that is why, in its time, Old Babylon was one of the most powerful civilizations in the world.